What is going on, people? Welcome back to King Pilled. Today, I am joined by not Cooper. Cooper is very soundly asleep at this point. He is an old man. 10:30 his time would be far too late for him to even think about doing anything remotely resembling getting on a podcast. And actually, we're getting started a little later than we originally planned. I've got my guy Dimes here with me today from the Blood Satellite podcast, and it's funny. We've been going back and forth trying to get our schedules lined up and trying to plan this conversation for a few weeks now. And we landed on tonight, and then we went back and forth a couple times, confirmed the time and everything, and talked about what we were going to talk about and everything. And at some point in there, neither one of us happened to actually confirm which podcast we were going to do this on. Each of us just kind of assumed we were going on each other's podcast, and so I hit him up and I was like, "Hey, are we still good for tonight?" And he was like, "Yeah, man, we're still good." And I was like, "Okay, cool."
Then we just sat there, two men in the champagne room of carelessness.
Yes. Then I was like, "Do you want to send a link for me to connect, maybe?" And he was like, "Oh, I thought we." So
Like 5 minutes out, and we're like, okay, I guess we got to find a third show that we're both going on now.
yeah, right. Just start running through the Rolodex. I happen to know a few podcasters. I'm cool like that.
Which is funny because like I know a few guys who are also live right now. I'm like, okay, let's just storm Prudentialists and Geo's show, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that'd be great. We're probably our numbers are probably doomed for the live views on this one if we're going up against those guys.
Just
'Cause I think we
walking
got
in
a
with
lot
my
of
muddy
crossover.
boots like Rick James.
Yeah, just kicking on the couch. What's up, random username $2 super chat? He said this is already a classic. Well, that's good. I'm good. I'm glad we're getting off to a good start here. So you guys will have to let Cooper know that you missed him and make fun of him for not showing up. Like maybe before he actually listens to the podcast, you guys should all be like blowing up his phone and busting his balls. Like, dude, how could you forget that there was a show? What's wrong with you? Matt's just sitting here by himself. That way, when he wakes up, he freaks the fuck out for a few minutes.
Yeah, when you're sending the text message, say something like, "Where are you? This is not good."
Yeah, get him real worried.
Just be vague. Just be like, "You need. Where are you?"
Yeah. Oh, I want him. Says we've got 14 people watching on YouTube right now. I want all 14 of you to be texting. I guess you can't text Cooper. DM him on Twitter at
Yeah.
Cooper Brooks. So Dimes, who are you? Tell the good people who you are, where you come from, and what you're all about.
Oh, great. I'll try and keep it short. My name is Dimes. I host a show with my co-host Judas called Blood Satellite. You can find it at bloodsatellite.ca. We're also on YouTube, Odyssey, clips all over the place, on Twitter at Legally Ironic. Canadian. I worked in marketing for, I would say, over 10 years. You tend to lose count. Yeah, it's a fun show, and I think in regards to what we're going to talk about today, maybe the marketing has the most to do with it. There's a lot of stuff I could plug. I'm not going to waste your time with that, but those are, I would say, the broad strokes.
What kind of marketing? Like what sort of products?
Well, that's actually, I'm going to, again, a deep question. I'm not going to try and bore you with the details because I could go on that alone for quite some time. So I would say there's a lot of people who work in marketing. It's a very broad field. There's a lot of different types of jobs you could have. You could work client side where you're just doing marketing for a company, whatever. Maybe it's a great company. Maybe it's a company that, doesn't always need to be Coca-Cola. It could be a company that cuts down trees. It could be anything. Or you could work agency side, ad agencies, think Mad Men. These are the sexier ones that people think of when they think advertisers. Or you could work for a nonprofit too. I've worked in all of them. So over my career, I've done client side, agency side. I've run my own marketing firm. I currently take on clients myself as in a consultant role, but so I've worked with a great variety of clients, everything from law firms to nonprofits, startups. I helped found a startup hub many years ago when I was living in Toronto. I no longer live there, but I lived there for many, many years. When I first started my career, I had a list of all the types of clients I wanted to work with based on industries. And over the course of my career, I got to work with all of them. Some I like more than others. I would say I prefer small businesses. which
Mm-hmm.
is something not a lot of people think of when they think of marketing. They think of, what I would describe early on is selling gum to retards. People think of like an advertisement, but think of your favorite company. Think of your whatever local business that you think is doing well. Well, they usually need some marketing help. So you can just work with small businesses. I prefer to do that. I worked at agencies that just work with small businesses, local businesses, and I prefer that. And I try and create a career trajectory that leads me in that direction. I don't like working with big brands, even though I've worked with them in the past. It's a nightmare. Some people get drawn in with the prestige of it, but it really is soul sucking. It's a young man's game too. I'm in my 30s, so at a
Mm.
certain time, like going out to clubs with clients isn't fun. You know,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No kidding. Is it a what would you say is the not the biggest thing, but what are some thoughts that you have, things that you've learned or like worlds that you've been exposed to in the marketing industry, the types of conversations you're having, the way people look at each other, the way people look at human beings, the way people view the structure of society, all this sort of thing. Do you think you have a unique perspective, or is it giving you some sort of insight into the nature of humanity and that sort of thing that may not necessarily be common in our circles?
yeah, most people. There's a few answers to that. I'll start with the one that just springs to mind now. Um, Let me just by saying what marketing is. Really, it's trying to just find the market for whatever it is you're doing. And most people generally don't think about that. They want to do a thing, and maybe that could be anything from I want to be a graphic designer or I want to start a show. And they don't think of who is going to watch it, who is this for, who will find utility in this thing. For example, when I was working at that startup hub, you would not, maybe you wouldn't be surprised by how many very intelligent people with doctorates, master's degrees, people with impressive CVs and resumes have sunk tens of thousands, maybe millions of dollars into a business and never thought of the actual application. Another, if you want to see this every day, go watch Dragon's Den, go watch Shark Tank. You will see people who've borrowed money from their friends, their family, from everyone to chase this dream. And at no point did they ask, who's this business for? Who's the audience? What is the market for this? And what they should have done is ask that early on. That's a hard thing to do. And I would say broadly, even on our side, more pointedly, said it's not so much a matter of empathy, but it is a matter of trying to think about what it's like for other people. Like it's easy to think of here's what I want to do because I think it's important. But how do you convince other people of that? Who are you actually going after? And do you actually understand those people? Do you actually understand the utility of what you're trying to do with the broader society? Some people don't even think about that, and they don't even write it down. So they just kind of pursue this dream internally. And the ones I feel the sorriest for, the ones who do like ruin themselves, their friends, their family financially chasing it without asking the simple question, because maybe that question would hurt their dream. Maybe they didn't spend time at the drawing board because it meant their dream had to become a little real, and that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. There's this can probably explode out into a discussion about patronage networks and stuff, and I speak to a great many of financially minded people, and one question we ask ourselves is, everyone says, and you say this too, so do I, so does everyone, we need patronage networks, we need more investment, millionaires, billionaires funding our thing. Yes, agreed. Have we really asked what is it that we are offering that they are funding? Because
Mm.
most Substacks are not terribly good. And people just thinking I should get $1 million for it. Like, why? Have you
Mm-hmm.
thought about what your audience is? It's like even successful creators. There's a lot of successful creators that are kind of plateauing. Like, well, where do I go from here? I have followers. What do I do with them? And they don't have a 10-year plan, 5-year plan. They don't really know what it is they're doing. And so, if we're asking for money or we're hoping for investors to invest in the strategy or the mission, like what really is the mission? And I'm not trying to disparage anyone. I'm as bad as anyone for that. But sometimes it involves just putting down what you want to do practically very early on or presently.
Mm. Which means you need to actually have a vision for something like that. You have to have a you have to have something to sell them. If you're this is I've spent a lot of time in sales, and it's like a truism that if people aren't buying it, that's a you thing. It's not a them thing. If you've got the best product in the world, if you've got the most amazing new innovation in the world and nobody wants it, it's up to you to frame it to them in a way that makes them want it. If they're not wanting it, that's a reflection on you. So you have to have something to sell them that isn't just something you value, but it's something that they value.
Yeah, asking what we can call them the end user, we can call them consumer, but whoever it is that you want to persuade, asking the question of what they really want is an incredibly deep question. It's a question that not a lot of people think much about. And there's many people who are dumb who will say things like, well, everyone just wants sex. So everything we sell should be sex. And that's, that's not that's a serious. That's just a flippant sort of thing to say. Or they'll be very high level, which is like everyone wants to be happy, and we'll
Mm.
probably get into this later. I'm really, shooting off all the cartridges early on, but I'm like, here's a headline for people. No one wants to be happy. Not really. Furthermore, no one really knows what happiness is. And happiness indexes are very shaky in their definitions of what happiness is. And it's usually a cluster of other things that people actually want. And you could actually divide this and demarcate between men and women, what they want, because not everyone wants the same things. But is happiness, once you unpack that, is that security? Is it stability? Is it a family life? There's lots of other, if you actually unpack these sort of very vague terms, you can drill down practically into what people actually want. And that's actually how you find your market as well. And you actually get to understand these people. And it's interesting to understand people. It doesn't need to be scary. It can be very fun. And the joke I always tell people, it's not even a joke, it's just more of a comment, really. It's that if you are in marketing, you'll eventually become racist, um, because you need to be. You
Uh huh.
will look at the numbers and you'll say, well, black people buy a certain way and they like certain things. The fact of the matter is black people like seeing black people in ads. Why is that? Well, because they're racist as well. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain demographic trends you can prove with data, and a lot of the agencies don't want to look at that data, but it's there. But then once you see the data, you're like, well, why is that? And you could really spend a lot of time in figuring out like why these behaviors exist as you're catering to those behaviors, if you find yourself in that position as well.
Mm. It's interesting that if something is true, it will inevitably rise to the surface.
Yeah.
You can't if something's true, if there's a truth out there, you can do whatever you want to try to keep it from appearing, but it's inevitably going to show up, which I think is a white pill kind of from our perspective. Like, if we believe certain things are true and that there are certain structural issues, we're like, these sorts of behaviors, this sort of policy, this type of action will inevitably cause this, whatever the thing is that's taking those actions, to fail. Well, okay, so if all these different institutions around us are doing all of the things that we believe is going to cause them to fail, then our it clarifies the solution for us, at least in my mind. That means,
Yeah.
okay, plan on what are you going to do when it fails? Where are you going to be? What's that going to look like? How are you going to plan for that? How are you going to navigate around it? How are you going to recruit other people to that same cause?
And that is the essential question, and I'm glad you said that. And not a lot of people ask that question, and I'll tell you why. My theory, anyway, it's that most people, not most, that's unfair. A lot of people, let's get technical. A whole whack of people on our side don't actually believe that they can win, so they don't even believe in a win scenario for them. It's a
Yes.
strange thing, and this is, some people call it blackpilling, call it nihilism, which would be more technically correct. But they're so convinced that they're almost convinced that what they believe is wrong, so they can never foresee a future where they're even vindicated. It's like you want the collapse to happen, but you don't think the collapse will happen. So it never occurred to you to think of what to do when the collapse occurs. A great example would be, I don't think most people, again, using these words, a whole whack of people on our side, were never prepared for the mainstream adopting a lot of our arguments
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of topics. And I'm not trying to pigeonhole you with these topics, but there's a lot of people right now who are talking like 4chan posts from 5 years ago about Jews.
Mm-hmm.
That was inconceivable, only a couple years ago. The fact that we never prepared for the day when this would be in the zeitgeist. So we actually don't know what to do now.
Uh-huh.
There's a few people. I know some people are kind of pushing, Keith Woods is doing things with the ADL and whatnot, but for most people, they're like, what we didn't think this day would come. So and we were almost convinced of the inevitability of being on the fringe forever. And so I think when people break away from that mindset, they could actually plan.
There's a technical term for that finding yourself in a situation where you're not sure what to do. I think it's called getting caught with your dick in your hand.
That is a technical term.
Yeah. That's so then when this sort of thing happens, you start to see this kind of like collective freak out where nobody was really prepared for this to happen. And so then people start trying to rationalize why it's happening. And then I guess if you have certain priors, then you might default to saying, "Oh, well, the reason this is happening, if my premise is every single one of these things is orchestrated and done for a particular purpose, namely to harm me, then when I see something like this, well, actually, this wasn't something that just kind of organically bubbled up. This is something that was intentionally seeded for specific reasons to orchestrate particular outcomes." And I think that's possible. But even if that was the case, okay, well, then what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to just kind of like wave your arms around and impotently yell about it? Again, this goes back to the marketing thing. If you want people to share your values and to start moving in the direction where you want people to move, then you have to put yourself in their shoes. You have to figure out, what does this person value? Because the thing this person values is the thing that's where I can get them. I can offer them something that they want, and I can then start moving them intentionally.
Yes, and that's a fantastic segue into another point, and I speak with people about this pretty frequently. It's like, sit and think very carefully about the groups who are not only on your side politically, let's call it the dissident right, but also maybe groups along the border who aren't really in it yet or not really on board with all the ideas, but could be. I'll give you an example. There's a huge marketplace, that's a bad word for them, but a huge marketplace of like homeschooling moms. There's a lot of moms out there who are fed up with, public schools, fed up with vaccines, fed up with all this stuff, but like aren't really in our sphere yet. They're right on the borderlands. So you have to think, okay, that's actually a really important demographic. Everyone talks about getting more women involved in this side. And here's a group of women who are probably, they fit 8 out of 10 of the value sets that you might want in these circles. So how do you make not even our ideas, but affiliation with us attractive to them? Well, now you got to get into the mindset of, a mom who's, a soccer mom who hates vaccines, who's part of these groups. And if you're a guy and you're not married and you don't have kids, that's a whole different world to you. I'm married. I have a kid, so I'm kind of adjacent to the whole weird mom internet. So I can kind of see, I'm not a part of it, but I kind of see over the hill and know what's going on over there. But I'm like, there's a huge, massive human capital over there. And that's a problem to solve. And problems to solve should make people excited. And you could actually just sit with 3 of your friends in a fucking room and have a brainstorming session of like, how do we get these people involved? But what does it take? Does it take like we set up a special farmers market? Like what else? And why do you want them?
Mm-hmm.
Here's another point. And this is something I'm hoping to develop in an article at some point in the future, really asking like what you want these people to do, because there's this idea that persists in our sphere. I think that we're hoping that our ideas will become attractive to the mainstream, to everyone else, and they'll take our ideas and they'll propagate virally, and they do.
And then when they do, then everyone freaks out about, oh, no, this is actually a trap.
Well, and also what you start to see is those ideas change as they're adapted, because there's a difference
Right.
between an idea and someone with first principles. First principles are a lot deeper. So you can take kind of a dissident idea about monarchy, about, one example would be, Bronze Age pervert came up with this idea of the longhouse. Some people might have heard of it. If you'll notice, the definition of the longhouse seems to change with whatever scene is using it. Why is that? It's because they can just take these ideas and reappropriate them to serve whatever their first principles are. So the first principle might be something like a girl boss leftist, or it might be, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a bunch of people who use, the term longhouse who have no fucking business using it, but they kind of fit it to fit their sort of individual goals. So what we're seeing is that, the idea of just releasing our ideas like doves into the world and that's enough isn't the case. So you actually need to say, I want people to hear our ideas, but I also want them in our sphere. And I also want them to do something, to have some project, some sort of mission. So let's say you want a bunch of moms, you want a bunch of dissident right moms. Well, what do you want them to do? Just hang around, or do you want to create some kind of parallel education network that would appeal to them and that would have a function in our space? By the way, that's something that can attract investment and patronage, but you'll never get people to patronize just the idea of a right-wing mom. What are they investing in? Where is the money going? They have to be doing something, some kind of project. It doesn't need to be a business. It can be a nonprofit. It could be just, it has to be some kind of mission, something with a success state, a win state, But I think a lot of people just want just money kind of free flowing because we think that's how leftists operate. We think, oh, leftists have patrons that just shower money on them forever, and that helps. If you actually know how leftist organizations operate, the spigot can be turned off. There's leftist orgs that stop getting money because they were deemed ineffective. Guess what? There's anarchist bookstores that shut down. Like there are lose states for a lot of them, but we kind of have this idea of leftists like, oh, they just get money from George Soros. Yeah, George Soros also stops funding stuff he thinks is a waste of money. So we have to ask what could seem like a waste of money to patrons or investors, and then think, what could we actually be doing? And then you are also thinking about audiences, like what is the win state and who is this for? This is all happening at the same time. But here's the thing, that's actually a problem you can solve. And once you kind of draw the edges around a problem, it becomes less scary. You become less depressed and frantic. You can actually orient yourself in the world. Anyway, that was a bit of a ramble there, but
This actually ties in a lot to what we've been talking about here on the channel recently, and it's kind of funny. Cooper and I have been watching the behavior of the channel, the comments, the likes, the views, just kind of since we kind of stuck our dick in this hornet's nest. We sparked off a big response. A lot of it positive, a lot of it negative, and it's been very interesting because this is stuff we've been talking about for, I don't know, a year and a half, to the point where a lot of it has seemed almost like we almost forget to talk about it because it's become so natural to us. But then we realize we put some of these ideas in front of other people and we get these really strong emotional responses. And then the natural, I guess, troll in both of us is like, oh, well, we weren't going to keep talking about this, but now people are yelling about us talking about it. So we've got to keep talking about it. But both of us we have the show going, and then we have, separate from the show, we have some different business ventures and stuff that we're working on. And there's a couple of guys who we've come across that I've mentioned on the show multiple times now. One of them, his name is Alex Hormozy, and another guy's name is Pace Mowbray. And both of them the sheer wisdom and knowledge and productivity that they are able to pack into every single day, their ability to connect with people, their ability to explain things, their ability to solve problems, and just their sheer relentless will toward success and wealth building and community building and nurturing relationships is just it's unmatched. And both of these guys could not be more ambivalent about the political situation. They're like, whatever, it is what it is. Like, I'm in the business of building up my empire. And if I get my empire to the point where I can do something about the political situation, then I'm going to do that. But for now, my job is to take the situation as it sits in front of me, break it down, figure out how to be successful within it, and then figure out how to raise up as many people along with me as possible. And that mentality, the more time you spend, I've been telling people, just start watching their videos. Like, replace one of your podcasts with their shows and just listen to them talk about stuff. Some of it's going to be more like technical marketing or sales strategies or advice, or how to scale this thing or that thing, or how this certain software works. Whatever. There's some stuff like that, which is very interesting. But then a lot of it is really just kind of mindset stuff. And I think the mindset stuff has gotten a bad rap because so you've worked in marketing. I imagine, have you worked in sales jobs as well? Been with like big sales teams?
Yes, I have. It's funny, way when I was younger, in my late teens, early 20s, I worked briefly as a door-to-door salesman too.
Mm,
But at various points, I'd also, when you're running your own marketing business, you're also getting clients, and that involves going to conferences, that involves cold calling, that involves every trick in the book. And as I've gotten older, there's two skill sets that have proven invaluable to me, which weren't stressed as much as I think they should have been when I took it in post-secondary education. One is project management,
mm,
and the second is sales. And once you really think about it, I'm not even sure sales can be taught. I think sales might be as close as you could get to a white collar version of a blue collar job, in the sense that I think you just need to get out in you just need to do it. You need to apprentice at it. It's just based on experience. There's only so much theory you can pack into it before you actually just, the more time you put into it, you just master it. And it's hard, and it sucks, and it's scary, and most people hate it for good reason. Everyone thinks they can do it, and very few people can actually excel at it, but those who do make a killing. And as a side point, this might be the only type of job that survives the AI revolution. Like,
mm-hmm.
sales might be the only job anyone has in 25 years.
Right. Yes. It's because when you really get down to it, literally every single interaction that you have with another person is, in some sense or another, a sales transaction. This is an autistic way to think about it, but it's true. In every interaction you have with someone, when you enter that interaction, you have something you want out of that interaction, and they have something that they want, and you guys are figuring out where you meet in the middle. A lot of this can be subconscious or intuitive, especially if it's a spouse or a sibling or someone who's close to you. But being able to sell isn't simply about like knowing the right closing techniques to trick someone into agreeing with what you want. Knowing how to sell means, number one, knowing how to listen to people, knowing how to hear what they're saying and understand not just the words that they're saying, but the pain that's coming behind them. This is not
Exactly.
and it's not necessarily from a feminine empathy sort of perspective. It's you can almost think of it in kind of a Machiavellian sense. Like when someone is describing to you what's hurting them right now, they're displaying to you their vulnerability. And if you can fill that void for them, then they're willing to give you something. This is how human beings are wired.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give a crude analogy, sales is a lot like sex. If you come with a bunch of tricks, a big
Mm,
toolkit, and a bunch of fluff, you're gonna wash right the fuck out. And many people do. And these are the non-sex havers. We all know
mm-hmm.
them. Throw a rock, you'll hit X in 10,000 years. But like, if you actually approach it like a human, and you actually try and engage with someone on that level, it'll be a lot easier. You don't need to trick them, right? So I'm trying to think. I'm going to cut off that because I can keep going with that metaphor for a long time and completely torpedo the show. But basically, like, a lot of people think sales, it's like, okay, I need to memorize this script, or I need to memorize this. At this point, I'm supposed to. Oh no, I'm supposed to close right now. Oh, this, can we start over? Like those guys who are like panicking. But if it's in your blood, and if you actually give a shit about the other person, and you did some research, and you care about their problem, you have a genuine curiosity and interest, then it becomes second nature. And if you have patience too. I mean, I closed a client recently, and I got through cold calling,
Mm,
and it was a local client, and then I gave them the quote. I didn't hear back from him for 2 months, and then he just called me out of the blue. It's like, oh, I want to do that thing, which
mm,
happens all the time. Like, but what they don't like is when you're like, okay, I haven't heard back from them after 2 weeks, I better send a follow-up email. Every fucking sales manager is going to tell you, like, after this amount of time, keep prodding them. And you've
mm-hmm.
probably gotten emails from SaaS software companies doing that. It's like, has that ever worked? Has that ever worked? There's a chart somewhere that says it does, but it doesn't. And you'll feel disgusting if you do it. And hang on to that disgust, because that disgust will serve you well in
Mm-hmm.
dealing on a one-to-one relationship with someone. Because if you land that relationship, maybe they stay with you the rest of their lives. every good sales guy I've known has had the clients for like fucking 15, 20 years. You know what I mean? Then the problem is getting lazy, but we don't need to go into that. You know, that's how you lose clients. You get, well, that's how you lose girlfriends too. That's how you lose like spouses. You get lazy, you get manipulative, you know, then it all falls apart.
Right. Like the worst thing that you can be as a salesperson is entitled. You have
Yeah.
to be you if you're a salesperson, a good person, a good salesperson, then really what you are is a professional problem solver. You're someone who finds people who have a problem and you figure out whether or not your solution is a good fit for them. If your solution is a good fit for them, then you figure out how to frame it to them in a way that's compelling to them, that reveals to them that you're solving their problem and how you're going to solve their problem. Not how you're going to solve their problem, but how it's going to feel once you've solved their problem.
Yeah. And we could do this with anything. You can take very big ideas and start to pick away at them. Let's do one right now. And maybe I'm seeing a lot of really good super chats here. There's this guy, random username 928. He's throwing heaters across the plate here.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing from him. Let's take a big thing you're trying to sell a group on. Let's say reversing the birth rate cratering, right? Let's say we want to encourage women to have more kids, or maybe the problem is people generally having more kids, but let's think demographically. We can do one thinking campaigns. Let's say we want to craft a message for two different groups. Let's say there's men and then there's women. Single men, single women, even more narrow. Good. Okay, so how would you convince single women presently that they should become mothers? Now, we can think about this. If you're an old chunk of coal like I am, this has been a topic that's been hammered out in our spaces and even in the mainstream press for, Christ, like decades now, right? But like right-wing guys, the previous message that I remember everyone going after was women with kids are happier. If you want to be happy, have a family. True. However, back to the point I said before, that's not necessarily persuasive because nobody really wants to be happy. I mean, do you want to be happy? I guess abstractly, but what does that mean? I don't want to be happy. Not really. What do I want? Well, I want for a guy happiness, we could probably go back and forth on this, but I think there's a few key things a lot of guys want. I think they want some sense of security and have their needs met, but they also want to have the sort of space they control. Especially if you're married, that's your family, that's your house. That like this is my place. I like maintaining it. I like protecting it. I like, this is my universe right now. Especially if you have kids. A lot of guys just want that, and that manifests in a lot of the art we make about having a homestead or having just a lot of that. If you boil it down, is just having a place of safety and prosperity that you control. It's like, okay, well, women kind of want the same thing, in my view. What women really want, not happiness, it's to be valued and to have some sort of status. And historically, that status came with being a mother. I think society or civilizations treated being a mother as the ultimate, the highest status, right? So at some point, and we could go on about how that occurred, but let's just say that went away. Now you achieve status through a career. So really what the problem here is reintroducing status to motherhood, not just happiness, not just like it's your biological imperative. Because if you know anything about women, they don't like being pointed at and talked down to. You can't tell women things. That's not how women operate, not with each other, not with men. You don't need to be married to know that. They have a different sort of communication patterns. What they don't like is being berated and told, here's how it is because of your ovaries. You need to, I mean, like it doesn't, they might say yes, but they're not actually persuaded. Persuaded is something that happens internally. And women are what we call revealed preference machines. Never listen to what a woman says she actually feels. You got to know she doesn't actually mean it. Women know that too. That's not necessarily a misogynistic statement. However, I do believe to truly love a woman, you need to be a misogynist, but that's another thing entirely. I think I do like women will say one thing, but they actually believe another or behave in a certain way. So you haven't won yet. If you get a woman to agree with you after you win a debate, they haven't really changed their mind or their behavior. They've just said something to shut you up. What we actually want to do is change their mind, which involves a lot craftier of an approach. But anyway, that now you're seeing that we're starting to get closer to the solution. So it's about, and this is a problem you can fix by over time culturally a high status position to have so that they actually want it. Completely going around the happiness argument, which we've been doing for like 15 years, and also the biological imperative argument, which, while true, is not persuasive, because you can say true things that they're not persuasive. And you or I or many of the listeners, we might say, well, if something's true, of course you should believe it, of course you should follow it. Well, here's the problem: that you're dealing with a group that doesn't really operate on those terms clearly. And if you want to win, if you want the thing you want to happen, you need to change your approach. And now we can go on this again for hours and hours and hours, but you're starting to see a solution start to take shape. This is a cultural change that we could do. And maybe you got to do it based on race too. Maybe do this for Asian women. The birth rate crisis is happening 10 times worse in South Korea. So maybe that involves a different approach. That's a whole conflagration of mess happening in South Korea. And maybe that's different for, Europeans or white Westerners. However, but now you're starting to see a solution start to form.
I want to really emphasize one of the things, like the purpose for why you're emphasizing or why you're focusing on this the way you are, is because, like you said, women don't want to be shouted down to. They don't want to be told this is your biological imperative to do this. And like you said, it's true, but it doesn't matter that it's true, because we want to be persuasive. And the reason we want to be persuasive is because it should be obvious that we need women on board to make any sort of cultural waves. To build a civilization, you have to have women. You can't. It literally is a biological imperative that you have women on board. And to have those women truly on board, they can't be bludgeoned into that position. This is just not how women work. It's not that you can't bludgeon them because it's mean or because it's wrong or because it literally it just does not work. It's like it's like I don't know, it's like picking up soap in the shower. There's particular ways that you can do it. Just reaching down and grabbing it as hard as you can isn't going to work. You're not going to be able to pick up the soap. It's going to keep squirting out. This is kind of how women are as well. And there's a fractal, get some fractals in the chat. There's a fractal relationship between the individual and the collective society. The things that are true for the individual are also true at the collective level. So as an individual, if you're a guy who's low status, who's unattractive, and you want a woman, the advice that someone's going to give you who really cares about you is you need to make yourself attractive to a woman. What are the things that are attractive to a woman? Make a list of them and then figure out a way to accomplish those things. On a social level, on a collective level, we also need to be attractive to women. This is a biological imperative, because it's a biological imperative that we need women on board with us. So how do we make ourselves attractive to women? How do we offer women what women want from the perspective of a woman? My good friend Josiah has given us a line that we use over and over again. Shout out Sudoku Politburo on Twitter. He said that dealing with women is 100% perception management. And this is the case here. So our public perception, it doesn't matter how true or right or autistically accurate we are. This is just the libertarian thing all over again. It's the same problem with the libertarians. They think they have all the answers correct, and everyone looks at them and they're like, man, I don't want to be around a libertarian. I want nothing to do with the libertarian. I don't care how true or right libertarianism is. I've met libertarians. I don't want to be a libertarian. We don't want the libertarian ant smell on us, where people don't give a shit how right or true all your ideas are. They don't care about your breakdowns of history or your philosophical inclinations or your economic understanding. None of this stuff matters if you cannot simply cross the threshold of being attractive to women. If you could be attractive to women as a movement or collective or organization or whatever it is, if you could be attractive to women, you have got the rest of the culture by the balls, because the entire culture follows middle to upper class white women. They drive the economy forward. Everything revolves around them and getting their minds and capturing them. So if we want to do that, then the project laid out before us is, how do we make ourselves attractive to this demographic?
And also one thing to keep in mind, and this is bit of good news is that I would say most women come to these conclusions themselves later on. So it's actually just a problem with time. So it's not like you really need to break any sort of permanent brainwashing. It's just being misguided. A lot of them just come to these realizations too late, when they're in their 40s, maybe when they finally have kids, they wish they did it sooner, things like that. So really I'm like, okay, so it's not even a problem of completely changing their minds. It's just pushing that window of time backwards, maybe when they're younger. I'm in my mid 30s and I just had a kid, like a year ago. I should have started when I was younger. What the fuck's wrong with me? Why didn't I do that? These are problems of sort of narrative control we can break, but they're not that insurmountable because the truth of the matter does come out in the end sort of organically. But we're just trying to say, let's do it before it's too late. Like all that OnlyFans stuff, like they go through the OnlyFans meat grinder, they come out the other side like, wow, being an online prostitute wasn't good. I'm like, okay, is there a way to make you reach this essential human truth before you get into that meat grinder? They
Well,
don't
what
they
that
don't they don't become diehard fans of being.
right. They don't like no woman grows up wanting to be that way. They wind up that way, and it seems like I didn't think this was that controversial of a thing to say, but people really seem to get upset when I say this. If you see a prostitute on the street, that is like a big neon sign that all the men in her life have failed her. She, whether it was her father or her pimp or her brothers or her ex-boyfriend or her grandfather or whomever it was, she did not have strong, um, wholesome men in her life. Because if she did, she would have followed them. They wouldn't have let her go down that pathway by definition. So if she wound up there due to the failure of men. And the only way she's going to get out of that is if men pick up that slack, which means men who were not necessarily responsible personally for her winding up there need to take responsibility for her. This is part of what it means to be a man, is to pick up the slack for other men, to carry to fill in that balance there. This is the servant leadership. This is the entire premise of Christ, the priest, the bishop. Every single one of these things is an icon pointing to this reality that the guy who's at the top, the king is a slave to his people. The guy who's at the very top of the hierarchy is actually at the very bottom of the hierarchy. He's the one who's responsible for everyone. And this is the proper, again, fractal, hierarchical frame of human society. When I say this, it's like guys seem to respond to this with like, oh, well, no, that woman can fend for herself. There's like this implicit treatment of like egalitarianism. No, she's a woman. That means she needs to have a man who is responsible for her. And if she's out with nobody being responsible for her, that's a poor reflection on men. She needs to be brought back in line by men. I don't understand how this is. If anything, I think I would be triggering the people that are calling me like a misogynist or something. I would think they'd get the lefty screeching at this. But for some reason, what do you think? Do you agree with what I'm saying here, or do you have other thoughts?
Absolutely. I agree with what you're saying. I think that's the ideal frame. However, I do want to give some. I can hear in the back of my mind a lot of the counter argument, which I want to just air here for the sake of fairness, which is that if I'm giving advice to a young man now, because I'm a millennial, older millennial. There's a lot of Zoomers who listen to the show too. Their experience in the dating market right now is not entirely different, but slightly different than what I went through. Like I met my wife before Tinder, if that can be believed. So I never even did all that shit. So I don't know what it's like to date in that fucking Tinder era. But I would say like a lot of guys would push back and say, look, the society is so tilted towards female sovereignty and empowerment. I'm putting my career, maybe even my life on the line by sometimes approaching these women. Like the dating market is so out of whack that to try and control women or to have this influence can be dangerous for some guys. The fact of the matter is I'm not a red pill sphere, manosphere guy. But a lot of those guys have made very valid points about the legal structure, especially in Canada, about how laws and regulations are tilted towards women's opinion, not even getting into the Me Too stuff. So it is a danger out there if you're trying to engage in male female relationships. Let's just say that. And
Hmm.
so that's why when I say, when we're talking about women that we're dealing with, I'm first thinking of women who are maybe on the periphery of our scene, because right now there's a lot of women out there, I don't know what percentage, but we're dealing in a lots here, who might just be man haters, who actually do just want men to suffer, and maybe they aged into that. Maybe they can be saved, but it's difficult for me to tell a young man to really shoulder their burden too.
Hmm.
Did you see what I'm saying
Hmm.
here? Like,
Yeah,
I
of
just want to
course.
be fair to like the realities that people are living into.
Right, and that's see, here's the thing: is I don't disagree with anything that you said. I think all of that is absolutely true, and I would say if you are a weak, vulnerable man, then you definitely should not be going and signing up for the most shitlib of shitlib chicks that you can find. Like, exercise prudence, have a little bit of wisdom for yourself, recognize what you can and can't take on, but as a matter of framing, realize that that's what it is, that the women who are the most fucked up, what you're saying, if you this hypothetical guy who's like, well, she's so fucked up, the legal structure, I do, if I try to go, she's going to drag me down, I can't risk something like that. I think
And
there's a legitimate question to be had here: who's failing whom?
yeah, and I got something occurred to me the other day, and we're getting into the weeds on an issue that might turn the audience against me, because we come to the issue that a lot of young guys feel, which is like, oh, women are a lot more liberated sexually. You get into the body count arguments. This is what the whatever podcast have kind of made their bones on, and Fresh and Fit and things like that. And I'm not arguing against that at all, but something did occur to me, and this is going to sound, feel free to tell me to go fuck myself, but I think about after World War II in Berlin, and in a great many nations in the wake of World War II, and especially the fall of the Soviet Union. you know there's a statistics that I'd heard, and maybe someone can correct me, that after the fall of Berlin, something like 200,000 women were raped by
Hmm.
Allied soldiers. And then abortions were rampant. And of course, the atrocities occur in these nations that have been conquered. And if you are a man in these nations, a very dark reality dawns upon you, that the likelihood of me, if I want my people to procreate, odds are I'm going to have to be with a woman who was raped and maybe had an abortion, or maybe has a baby already that was from a rape. And that's a situation not a lot of us will ever have to deal with, but in many Eastern European countries, that was a cold reality. In many South American countries, maybe that's a reality we'll have to deal with soon, depending on how multipolarity shakes out. But when hard decisions have to be made on whether you want to procreate with sort of a fallen people, because
Mm.
if those people had said, like, I'm not going to marry a busted woman, well, maybe there's no more fucking Germans. You know what I mean? Like,
Uh-huh.
maybe, like, you see what I'm getting at here? Like, it's not ideal, the idea that you have to, most of the women might have higher body counts than you would like, but then it's like, well, I don't know, like, what do I do? So then I'm just not gonna have any kids with any woman then, you know what I mean? Or do you have to just make that compromise? Again, let me know if I'm way off on this,
Yeah,
but
no, I think this is these are difficult questions. Like, these are the exact problems that I'm talking about. The thing I'm getting at here is, like, I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture, and I think obviously you aren't either. Like, the times are bad. The shit's getting real, and these are the types of things you have to grapple with. But the only way that a civilization can, that I'm aware of, the only way a civilization can bootstrap its way out of these sorts of unideal circumstances is by a sufficient number of men within that society deciding, we're going to grab this situation by the balls and own it. We're going to pay, essentially, we're going to pay the debts that are owed, because this is what has to happen in order for us to get back to ground zero, so we can build up from there. So I don't care whose fault, I don't care who brought on the debt. I don't care whose fault it was. I don't care why it happened. I don't care the details. All I know is that there's a debt that exists and it needs to be paid. I can pay it. I'm going to pay it. And I'm not saying this specifically just like with the respect to busted women or whatever. Like in general, across the entire society, there's all these different things that are wrong with the society. All these different inbuilt corruptions and degradations, and everyone's waiting for someone else to go fix it because everyone has a legitimate case that it's someone else's fault. And every single one of these cases is legitimate. There is a legitimacy to the idea that it's the blacks or the Jews or the communists or the World Economic Forum or the neocons or the women or the Frankfurt School or whomever.
Yeah.
Every single one of these people, yes, is responsible, but we don't have time to sit around and hash out who, we can't sit here at the table and go through the receipt and line out the line items on it and split the check. Like, we need someone to just come in and drop down the credit card and pay for the check so we can leave.
Interesting is like any dire social phenomena, it's the intersection of a lot of different issues. So it's all of that, plus it's also the fact that, hey, there's plastic in your blood. Hey, also sperm counts have been dropping for, I don't know, a few decades now. Also hormones are in the water and we don't know what to do with it. Like, there actually are chemical and environmental reasons for why people aren't procreating that maybe, gender relations can't solve, but we have problems simultaneously, and it seems like it can drive you mad if you try and get your arms around it. But that's why maybe people need to solve each one independently. But that's why I say there's no one way to fix the birth rate crisis. Yes, the gender relations is one thing, but also, is that could improve the divorce rate, but does that really help the birth rate? Because the amount of how people are struggling to have kids could be another thing. And guess what? There's also economic and financial problems too. So like, there's all this shit together. And so I just don't want people to think there's an easy fix, but I do think, I think there's a social phenomena happening right now with we witnessed the rise of the incel. And I remember the rise of the incel. A lot of people take it for granted now. I remember when incel online was like 5 guys with blogs,
Yeah.
and we all thought they were like wild and like they were jokes. And these are the guys who are ranting about how like their parents were pieces of shit for not buying them a prostitute. And then we all would make fun of them. But now it seems that half of all people are incels. And then you're seeing the rise of the femcel. Now, how genuine the femcel character is, I'm not sure. I don't know the data or the breakdowns, but it does seem to be in the zeitgeist, this idea that there's a lot of like terminally, so actually, the belief is that, oh, they say they're single, but they can get any man they want. There actually are just some weird, ugly women like who just, they're smelly like guys are. And if you actually walk down the street, go walk down the street tomorrow, I bet you can see a few of them. And you're used to canceling those women out of your vision because they look kind of funky, like a lot of the incel guys, but they're out there. Maybe there's more of them than ever before. Something is happening where men and women, maybe not in the exact same ratios, but there's actually a conversation about like, there's too many unsexed people and they're killing themselves as a result. And I think something's happening there. I don't know what, but if some people think a war is coming, but I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I don't know who's going to fight it.
Well, there's this idea of, I know What If, there's a guy, that content creator, What If Althist, you know about him, right? He came with a video that was taken down, I think re-uploaded just recently, saying that there's going to be effectively a civil war or an incel revolution. I mean, we could talk about that if you want to.
Yeah.
But and the reason I'm skeptical is you got to know a thing or two about revolutions. There's actually a really fantastic book by Martin Gurry called Revolt of the Public. We actually covered a few of these books on revolution, how a revolution actually functions. They actually function a lot like coup d'etats. Edward Litwack wrote a very good book called Coup d'etat. The way these revolutions tend to work is they thrive, and this includes Occupy Wall Street too. They thrive when the enemy is ill-defined. They define when they actually don't. They succeed when they don't actually have a policy position. They just have an enemy they're trying to attack. They just want to bring something down. The more effective it is, the less of a plan they will have for the day after. And that usually means they can be hijacked once they win, which frequently happens. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he makes a good point that the outcome most antithetical to the Bolshevik army. But that's another thing we could spend some time on. Anyway, point being that for a revolution to occur, you actually more than anything need an enemy to destroy to get people to attack. And so if there's an incel revolution, what would they be attacking? Because it sounds like they would just be attacking women. Now, if that is what it is, we kind of need to say that. I don't actually think that's what's going to happen. And if not that, then what are you? Is it Biden? Is it Trump? Like what is the revolution targeting? There can be an upheaval, but the danger is that the very the social unrest and the oppression that can lead to a revolution can also lead to self-destruction. You have a lot of very angry, upset people who want to lash out. And more often than not, they lash out at themselves and they turn to deaths of despair and suicide. So it's not obvious to me that a wild, revolution is going to sweep the country. We could just see increasing rates of suicide and substance abuse, which is actually what we have been seeing, which is in my mind perhaps even worse. Anyway, so I think we romanticize the idea of a revolution, but if you actually study revolutions and how they function, I think it's missing some key components. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
That's really interesting because I have the same takeaway, but for kind of for different reasons. I hadn't even thought about that dynamic. Because I mean, uh, a revolution of, I don't know, angry young men going around killing women is also not a revolution that's going to last very long, because and it's not going to be a revolution that ends with the angry young men taking power somehow, just for, I would say, for general social biological reasons. That's not a um, that's not a cause that you're going to get sufficient people rallied around to actually have any sort of major civilizational success. So that means it's only going to serve as um, a deconstructive tool. So I would wonder, okay, who's wielding this deconstructive tool? Who might have an incentive to to cut loose a bunch of angry young men to just go kind of rampage? It sounds a lot like the Black Lives Matter thing. Like that was the purpose of Black Lives Matter, was to go rampage through a city and cause chaos for the sake of sort of upending the chessboard long enough to move some of the pieces around and people to align themselves and fundraise and everything. It was very obviously a proxy arm of various people.
Yeah,
Uh,
and also Black Lives Matter was a great example because what motivated that was what the media didn't want to talk about. They actually did have targets. They had two targets: police and white people, and they succeeded in targeting both across the nation. A lot of people don't talk about that. We cover that on our show because we've been doing our show for too long. But during what they called the Summer of Floyd or the Summer of Love, I don't know. People don't seem to remember that in every major American city there was bloody, fiery riots,
mm-hmm.
and then we just kind of moved on from that. Like, no, that was a race riot, a national race riot that we just. But anyway, that was their goal, not outwardly stated. They had a whole bunch of, the original BLM site had all kinds of anti-capitalist messaging. Really, what it was anti-cops, and they seemed to do. They got what they wanted, but that community doesn't even really know what it wants a lot of times. So they got the cops defunded, and then now they're complaining that there's not enough cops. Anyway, we don't need to go down that road, but that's a great example of they had their targets, and then the looting was there too. But what they really loved doing was burning police stations and you know punching white people in the street because of white supremacy, whatever.
You know what's interesting is that this might be a little rabbit hole to run down. So you, as you described, we had national race riots for several months, longer than that, maybe. I don't remember exactly. We had national race riots where people were burning down city blocks, burning down police stations, looting stores. Like, and if you went back to, I don't know, say 2005, and you described that phenomenon to someone, that person would not picture that as an event that just happened in the course of the evolution of a society. They would see that as like the complete breakdown of civilization. Whatever came out of it would be something different than what was before it. Yet here we lived through that, along with we could sit here and list off a whole bunch of different things that people would see as like civilizational turning points, and yet here we are. We just kind of keep chugging along. We still implicitly think of 2024 and 2021 and 2017 and 2012, and we implicitly think of these as part of the same reality. This is like the same continue. This is America. This is just America degenerating. And it's kind of like everybody's sitting here waiting for a certain shoe to fall. They're waiting for that one singular event where you look back in the history books and this was the date where everything changed, and it was all that was the end of America and the beginning of something else, or whatever, the end of something and the beginning of something else. Yet we just kind of keep just chugging right along. And this makes me wonder, maybe you have some thoughts on this. Is there an event like that? Is there something coming? Is there I think this is like the remnants of the Left Behind series kind of in people's consciousness, that there's going to be this moment where all of a sudden everyone is raptured, and now we've hit the turning point. We have the date in history where before that was normal history, and after that we've started the millennium or whatever. Do you actually foresee a seminal event like that, some great catastrophe or something, or do you think that we're just going to keep continuing on as we've been continuing on, or do you think that great event has already happened? Is it already in the past? And we just don't realize it.
This is, I can spend a lot of time getting really trippy with some ideas here, and maybe I'll set it up by describing two things. I know my friend Thomas 777, we had him on our show, an interview quite some time ago. He was explaining the concept of historical time. You know, we tend to think of in centuries, but historical time is different. You know, historical time can actually, an epoch could span across the demarcation of centuries. And he would describe, you know, the 20th century is almost the short century. Like the 20th century was sort of like World War I, World War II, and just after that. And then we're in a new period immediately after that. Anyway, it introduced the idea of how to measure time based on sort of historical events like what you're talking. There's two books I had read that sort of discuss something that ties into this that I think affect our ability to forecast something like this. And I'll give you a break to jump in so I don't spend 2 fucking hours talking about this. There's this fantastic book that a listener of the show sent me called Decadence by Jim Haugen. Very difficult book to find. You can find it online somewhere to read it. Can't recommend it enough. He's a journalist, and it was a story about the counterculture from the 60s. So this would have been really the boomer revolution. We're talking hippies. We're talking about that whole period that we have such a love affair in America. But it was actually a phenomenon that happened worldwide. Interestingly, that doesn't get brought up. He had said, interestingly, there was a hard demarcation between the Beat generation and the boomers. They both had their own counterculture, but they're different countercultures, and it's not obvious that they were really connected. So the Beat generation forecasted the future as doomed. They were cynical. It was dark, and you know what? You can't really do anything about it. You can kind of try and maybe prevent it, but it's inevitable. The boomers and the hippies and that ilk saw it a bit differently. They said, you know, the end is coming, and we can be its shepherds. We can be agents of change that spark the cultural, the mind revolution, the love revolution that will bring the end and usher in the age of Aquarius or whatever it might be. And interestingly enough, the counterculture people generally have the wrong idea about it. That's outlined in this book, and I believe it. People they incorrectly think of the counterculture as a leftist movement when in fact it was organically generative movement that was hijacked by leftists later on for the purposes of the Vietnam War. But if you actually look at what the counterculture was, it was a whole bunch of separate, kind of like the dissident right. The argument, he doesn't make this in the book because it was published in the 70s, I believe, but the headline that we had covering was they went through back then almost essentially what we're doing right now. So it was the counterculture was, you know, the LSD culture, but it was also the hippies, and it was also this sort of anarcho-primitivism, and it was also getting into Eastern mysticism. These were all happening separately, and they kind of fuse together later on. And what's interesting is the lifespan of that counterculture kind of mirrored what we're going through now, in the sense that it started off with a bunch of theory and ended with a bunch of people trying to go into the fuck societies. like line for line, this happened before. And so the question is, well, what happened, then? Anyway, the point of that book, I could spend a long time on that book, but the point of that book was to say that we never really left that frame of mind, because they'll say, what happened to the counterculture? What happened to that revolution? Well, it became the mainstream culture. This is Steve Jobs. This is how fucking jeans ended up in the workplace. These are all the hippies showing you a PowerPoint presentation with fucking Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and talking about microdosing mushrooms in the boardroom. So those people are just there, right? But we never left that mind space of the end is coming and we can accelerate towards it, and we can be the ushers to the glorious apocalypse. That's actually a weird way of looking at society, and arguably it never existed before that generation. That probably didn't really exist in the medieval era, not really. There's some debate about that. He kind of talks about that in the book, where there was sort of an apocalyptic obsession with the return of Christ. But when that didn't happen, it was like, well, we're not actually counting down to the end of society like we've been doing for the past 70 years or even longer. Now, there's also this book, there's not just one book, there's several books written by Marshall McLuhan. And we're talking about time here. We're talking about how we measure time and how we view the future. So we have a permanent apocalypse that we're actively moving towards in the future, but how we measure how we get there has changed. So he discussed in Understanding Media, it's this phenomenal book, can't recommend it enough. Marshall McLuhan, one of the great Canadians. If you can believe it, Canada used to be known as pioneers in tech and media literacy. Marshall McLuhan takes a very, very metaphysical approach to media and communication and language and things like that. And he talks about how over time, our understanding of time has changed over the centuries, and especially in the West, and how the Western mind views time as a container of events. Right now, throughout time, there's always ways to measure time. There was water clocks, there was sundials, so we knew how to measure time throughout time. But with the invention of the clock and the invention of, like the idea of a minute or 15 minutes being something that has utility, like I can fit labor in there, and if I don't use that time and fill it with labor, then it's wasted time. The idea of having wasted time was kind of a new invention. And the idea was, as we've kind of progressed through time, our focus on like the minutes and seconds of time to try and utilize it for something has sort of gotten more and more microscopic. And what's interesting is, consider this, that, again, we're looking back in time. We didn't used to have this idea of generations like boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. That was kind of a weird thing, especially the idea that generations were pitted against each other. Now, of course, there was always a disagreement between the elders and the youth. That's just a perennial issue. But the idea that we see boomers as like a different fucking species and millennials as a different class, that's sort of a new thing. Arguably, that really only emerged with boomers. Not to say that they're responsible for it, but it's just a thing that happened. And what I notice is that we keep splitting up the generations. So the millennials have like millennials, but then there's zillennials who are Gen Z. And within a generation, demarcations of like 5 years are almost like different experiences entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Like my wife is 5 years younger than me, and she almost has a different mindset than I do. So anyway, our measurement of time gets more and more and more finite, and the identities that can be contained when that fragment of time get more and more and more profound. We separate more and more from each other. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, not only is our view of the future distant and apocalyptic, but our focus on smaller and smaller allotments of time has become more profound and almost identities in themselves. So that affects how we even view cataclysmic events, right? A lot of people in our sphere say nothing ever happens. You'll hear that all the time. Like, we're waiting for a collapse and nothing ever happens. Things are fucking happening all the time. It's an insane thing to say. Ukraine is a meat grinder right now. I don't care where you fall on that conflict, but there's things happening. in Ukraine right now. There's things happening in Europe, but we're so hyper focused. Like there's so many things happening all the time that we're focused on. We get the sense that nothing is happening. So if a catastrophe, there is kind of a catastrophe happening right now, and we're just living inside of it and we don't notice it. But I think the tools we have at our disposal to even identify a massive phase shift might be totally out of whack. Now, I gave you a lot of stuff there. What do you think about all that?
Oh yeah. So there's this interesting thing about nothing and everything, where they can kind of be the same thing sometimes. So if everything is happening at once, then in a sense nothing is happening, because like happening is a like an indicator, or like a defining trait that you use to pick out the thing that's happening from the rest of things that are not happening. But if literally everything is happening, then there is no longer that defining trait to pick it out from the rest of them. So when everything is happening, well, now you lose the ability to pick out the thing that is happening. Happening actually becomes kind of meaningless. The idea of something happening implies nothing happening. So once everything is happening at once, then nothing is happening, and it's like both are true simultaneously.
Yeah,
Also, the you have the this generational thing, which is really interesting. We've talked about this a lot. The way the generations are, number one, thinking of ourselves in terms of generations, and then demarcating these generations, and they seem to often correspond to, or not often correspond to, but rather they are um, defined by technology. And the ways that we identify and pick out different generations hinges largely on the types of technologies that informed their experience of the world. And then, if you grew up where radio, like when radio was invented for the first time, that's going to have a really profound impact on your experience of the world versus those who lived before you. But then to go from radio to TV to color TV to and all the way up to where now we have VR goggles and all this sort of stuff. These changes have been happening more and more rapidly. Shout out Nick Land. We're seeing the acceleration of technological development, which then on the generational level, I think is making these generations smaller and smaller and smaller. Because if you think about the experience of someone who was born in 2005 versus someone who was born in 2010, the person who was born in 2005, they like the Trump thing that happened, that began happening when they were 10 or 11 versus the 5-year-old. And think about your awareness of the world around you as a 5-year-old versus a 10-year-old. The life experiences that they have at an early age, and then especially as they're coming of age. Now, someone who was born pre-COVID and someone who was born post-COVID have very, very different experiences of the world. So there's something that's happening where we get this awareness of time, and then through the various innovations and technology, it's like time is happening faster and faster and faster. More and more things are happening within each second, and we're moving on a trajectory where this is going to go. Is it parabolic or hyperbolic? I don't.
I think it's hyperbolic.
Yeah, whatever. Where it goes upward.
I shouldn't have said anything. Now, if I'm wrong,
right now we're both going to get made fun of. Well, you're in it with me. You know what I mean. So like, we're hitting this accelerating point where, I mean, even the idea that we could sit here and have a conversation like this in real time, being separated by who knows how far, and we have a whole bunch of people right now. How many we got? Something like 45 people 48 people watching live on YouTube. So we have 48 people who are watching us just on YouTube in real time, and those people are probably watching while they're doing something else. There's all this found time that we're getting through all this technology, but so now people are doing more and more and more, and yet at the same time they're also doing less and less and less. These are weird paradoxes that I don't know what to do with them.
I also want to just call attention to some of these phenomenal chats we've been getting. I don't know the context. I'm seeing Vulpus Persona, someone I recognize, great friend of the show, just saying "goon here now."
Oh, we got a big old super chat, Paladin YYZ. Shout out to the homie, 42 US dollars. He says, a word of caution to men who feel compelled to play shepherd to some lost lamb. Have your ego intact and don't be afraid to cut the line. You may be a great man, but you're a no match for the previous 20 losers that made her. That very well may be true. I think for the vast majority of guys that is true.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to get to earlier, where I was cautioning people. Like there's some problems that you can't solve just as a wayward man trying to make his way in the world right now. So don't try and take that upon your shoulders. You know, like if you try and save a drowning person, maybe you both drown sometimes.
Right. But then, as a matter of framing, recognize that that's the reality. Recognize that this isn't that. I guess you could say it isn't that she's not good enough for you. It's that you're not good enough for her. You aren't a strong enough or established enough or secure enough or whatever it is. You aren't a man who is capable of taking something like that on, which is fine. You can become that. You don't even have to become that for her per se. But this is a she's reflecting yourself back to you when you see that. When you're like, oh, I couldn't take that on. This would be too much for me. I would get dragged down by this. That's if you have that intuition is probably correct and you should listen to it, but you should also understand what that intuition means and where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It's your biology telling you that you need to make something out of yourself.
And also for the guys out there who's saying, Matt, Dimes, you got a lot of highfalutin ideas. What am I supposed to do with this? I'll give you the two types of girls you should go for. Save yourself the pain. I want you to go for rural goth girls. I'm talking goth girls who know their way around a tractor. That's not a euphemism. Literally, just it is what it sounds like. And I want you to find yourself. Failing that, find a hippie girl. I'm talking a girl that's into crystals. Don't go full. You're going to find girls who might seem like that, but they're just stoner chicks. And the key is going to be dreadlocks. You want to steer away from that, or give her a few minutes, a little while to kind of percolate. Then she'll get out of that. You got to find yourself a girl who's into crystals. Don't be afraid of bitches who are into horoscopes. That can be a green flag. You know, yes. I gave you two hot leads. Go and be prosperous.
Bitches be doing horoscopes. This is what bitches do. Shout out to the Prudentialist. He says, howdy, Matt. Howdy, Dimes. Good to see you, my friend.
Now that Prudentialist, there's a guy who knows a thing or two about fucking rural goth bitches.
Kate J says Joshua Ham can tell you about that. Yeah, Joshua Ham has regularly told us about how he even in his post-military state and everything, he suffered through that. He talks about his big titty goth girlfriend that he turned into a wife.
I will say it's funny.
She's out on the farm churning butter for him and stuff, so he's got it made.
It's funny every time we're talking about this, then you just see a woman pop up and chime in like, "Oh, I didn't know women listened to this."
I think we have like 3.
I got a few too, and they are fucked.
Yes. They're like we had this conversation within the King Pill Discord. We talked about it as we started getting more numbers in there. We were like, do we do men only? We've already got some women in here, so we would have to kick them out. We have to make a thing about it. Do we do men only, or do we just leave the women in here? And it's up to them. They can hang out, and if they can hang, they can hang. More power to them. And if it's too much for them, then no hard feelings. And so far, they've all done great. They're hanging very well.
The women in our chat and whatnot have really enlightened me on new and exciting ways to bully women. There's one thing that I had no idea about, and I'm giving you guys a peek behind the curtain. If you really want to make women upset, that's what gets me up in the morning. I like making women mad, right? Something arm fat, and there's a little bit of fat right above sort of the boob line. Apparently, that is like a mind-breaking thing. If you zoom that, it's over for them. So I use it sparingly because that's a mind killer.
There was a girl that I knew in college that called it the Grandma Wave Bye-Bye Fat. Like the tricep dangle.
And I'm an older guy. As you age, your appreciation of like peculiarities of women just increases. Like when I was like 15, I knew exactly the type of woman I was into. Now I'm like, really, if you're just not fat, I can find something to like. Like I
Uh-huh.
can. I'm pretty. Hey, it's the beauty of God's creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Except I think a woman without a chin is about as bad as a guy without a chin. That still bugs me.
It's well, yeah. It's just kind of like I mean, shout out to them for living with that. I grew a beard to cover my chin, so maybe I'm not one to talk, but
I was saying
it's
you
just
can't tell with you. You got that's you shouldn't have said anything.
it's just jarring. It's like there's something missing. How do you? What I want to know is like how do you put a pillowcase on a pillow if you don't have a chin? Like do you have some sort of special technique that you've developed because you can't hold it with your chin? This is a serious question.
Like, can the guys? Is there a way to take advantage here in Canada? We've got a pretty robust but terrible public health system. There's ways to get what the trannies get facial masculization surgery. Can guys just do that to get a chin? Do you think?
Hmm.
Say you're trans and get extra bone added to your chin?
Yeah, you might be able to get some. You might be able to get some hormones that way too, but you have to be careful. You make sure you get the right ones.
Let's go into the fucking doctor. I need a chin squarening.
Can you break my jaw for me and then just realign it and squirt some chemicals in there to puff it out a little bit, make me more imposing?
I need, I need to look fucked up.
uh, okay. Well, you said you had a number of different thoughts that you'd put together there. Have we gone through all of them? Did you have any others?
um, yeah, actually, you know what? There was one thing, just because it's funny that we were talking about McLuhan, we're talking about historical time, then we're just talking about fucking chin surgery. Um, but there's one thing very cleanly with what we were talking about before. You were talking about the moment of rapture, which could also be maybe a moment of vindication for men and women on our side. This is a thought I'd given to people before. I'm not even saying this is the case, but consider it. Maybe all the people who can be red pilled have been red pilled.
Hmm.
And you're talking about earlier about like a big moment of clarity for people, and then what do we do after that? I'm going to give an example that might sound very spicy, sizzling for some, but let's give the example of Kanye West talking about Jews, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for the anti-Semitic right, that's the best day ever, because one of the perhaps arguably the biggest hip hop artist in the world, due to name exposure, and also one of the top celebrities on earth, made it so that every single person had to have an opinion on this topic. He literally took the talking points from 4chan, from a lot of times like the right stuff is, whatever these spheres are, and just put them out there. So everyone was talking about it. Everyone was exposed to the JQ. And then so that happened. And then everyone was red pilled by that. Did anything change? Arguably, maybe some stuff did, but everyone was red pilled, and that everyone took the red pill that could take it. And what happened after that? Well, we know what happened. So it's not a case of we just need to get our ideas out there, or their ideas out there, whoever's ideas. They were out there. Now what? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone who can be red pilled on COVID has been red pilled. Those who still believe the mainstream narrative, whatever that may be, you're not going to expose them to new information you can't jailbreak them even at this point. So there's certain topics that the awareness is at maximum, because that's the idea of red pilling. You make people aware of the hidden reality. Everyone's fucking aware. If people are choosing not to subscribe or move forward, maybe you just gotta not leave them behind, but not actively bring them with you. They'll come along eventually, because most people, most revolutions, just back to the revolution idea, most revolutions are not populist revolutions. They're executed by a minority of the population. I think it was it was either War of the Flea by Robert Tabor, or maybe it was Coup d'etat by Lutwak. He shared a very interesting story of the Cuban Revolution. The Cuban Revolution is a fantastic period of history to research, and it shows Fidel Castro and his rebels in the mountains taking the capital city. And if you ask people after the revolution, every citizen of Cuba said that they were in favor of the revolution and maybe even were active participants. The reality was most people were passive and inert and just waiting. They're waiting in their homes. They're not doing anything. And getting people to do nothing is actually part of what a Christian needs. But most of the time, most people just go with the flow. And it's very, very difficult, especially with women, to get them out of the comfort zone, because believing what we believe is actually socially damaging, which is stronger pressure for women than with men. So, we have to go about our business and do our projects and our missions knowing that if we win, when we win, people will just come along with us and act like they were in favor of our stuff the whole time. And you know what? That's fucking fine. You need to be okay with that, because at this point we've tried the awareness thing. Everyone's aware and there was no fucking rapture. So what now? They're going to lie later, just like they lied with COVID. Everyone is pretending they didn't behave during COVID the way they behaved during COVID. Do not underestimate people's ability to just lie to themselves and to you about things they believed in the past. But you know what? That's how it happens. So, awareness campaigns, awareness projects, sure, keep it up. Keep trying to red pill people. Keep getting into arguments online. Actually, I'm not being sarcastic. Keep the background noise that we do. You can stay in comment sections and stuff. However, this other stuff is probably more important, and a lot of these people will come later on, I think, on their own accord. What do you think about that?
Yes, that hit a nerve here. Speaking of the sales conversation we were talking about, there comes a point where if you're working with a particular prospect or client or something like that, you can give them all the information in the world, but ultimately they're going to have to take action on something. And if you if you're the person who has the problem and needs the solution, you're the person who's being sold to, there's going to come a point where you're just going to have to pull the trigger. You're just going to have to make a call. You're going to have to decide, I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to figure out how to make it work if it doesn't work. Yeah, but you have to take action. There has to be a decision point there. Information beyond a certain point doesn't help someone make a decision anymore. They have to be given a reason to make that decision. We were talking in the King Pill Discord earlier today about this idea of entrepreneurship, and a lot of people see this distinction between, like, they see entrepreneurship as being like something that's risky, that's kind of this like bold move. You're someone who's going out on your own, that sort of thing, and then they see someone who has a job as someone who's like is opting for the safe route. And I think a really useful way to look at this is I think that distinction, I understand why people make that distinction, because they're trying to differentiate between the people who do what most people do, which is get a job, and the people who don't do what most people do. However, I don't think that difference is actually really substantial in terms of risk. In fact, the job may be the riskier option, because if you think of yourself as a business, like when it comes to working, when it comes to your career, you are a business. Now, the question is, what are you selling? Are you just selling your labor? Is the only business contract that you're capable of entering into a labor for money contract? Then you're just like a normal employee. That's what it is. It's a labor for money contract. So you are running a business that has a single client or single customer. This is, if you think about it that way, well, that's actually not very safe at all. That can actually be pretty risky, and you're capping a lot of your upside going that route. You might want to diversify that. You want to have as many. You might want to. You don't have as many clients as possible, but you want to have an acceptable number where you can hedge that risk. Now, this is something that the vast majority of people aren't even going to be able to wrap their minds around this. It's just the immune system is just going to kick it right out, and they're never even going to be able to take it in. And I said there's basically, I think, three different types of people. And this is reading from what I wrote in there when we were talking about this earlier. Um, I said whether their business is one where they hire other people or one where they hire only themselves, they're still operating a business. And their business has one client who is, by definition, the stronger party to that negotiation. It's true that most people can't even do something about this. Like, I'm granting that. Like, yes, the vast majority of people, they're not going to be able to do anything about this. The vast majority of people can only be wages and ought to be wages. And that's just how it's going to be. These are the people who are just going to follow along. Then there's three different types of people. So number one is the people who understand this reality implicitly and they act immediately and aggressively to level themselves up. So these would be the type of people we might call like a natural entrepreneur or something like that. These are the guys who are just cranking businesses out left and right and fantastic self-starters, whatever. They pick themselves right up by their bootstraps. Number two would be the people who are what I wrote is that they're either too retarded, too lazy, too unlucky, too geographically limited, disabled, etc. For whatever reason, they have some reason why they're not able to do anything about this. Like, all they can do is get a job. They're going to get a job. They're going to work that job. They're going to be completely at the behest of their employer. And if something changes that's out of their control, they're hosed. They have to start over completely from scratch. And their earnings, their monthly earnings, overnight go from whatever it is to zero. There's no gradual step down. These people aren't going to be able to do anything about it. And I understand that. Those aren't going to be the people who I'm talking to. I'd be talking to group three, which is the people who are not naturally number one. They're not the natural entrepreneur as we colloquially think about it, but they can learn to be that. I said not every one of these people needs to become the apotheosis of group one, but they can move themselves much further along on that path than group two. So the second they're both risky paths, but the second one, if you can work yourself into that position where you can diversify your sources of income, you can develop individual skills where you can own the product of your labor by connecting with a bunch of different clients, and you can set up that lifestyle for yourself. This applies in more than just the career domain. This also applies politically. It applies socially more broadly. These are skills that you don't have to silo these skills into these individual domains. They're actually applicable across a broad range of domains. So I think that there's the theory cells. There's the people who want to sit around and have arguments online, which I've spent years and years doing. So I'm very much one of these people. Like you're saying, there comes a point where you can only red pill people so much. You can only tell them so much, like what the problem is and what they need to do. At a certain point, it's up to them to actually take action and do something about it. And ultimately, those are going to be the people that you have to spend your time with. Those are the people who you have to build your tribe out of, is the ones who are going to take action. And as a small consolidated minority of people begin to take action toward a particular end, the rest of the people will naturally gravitate that way, especially the women. Because this is how women are naturally wired.
Yeah,
they're naturally wired to follow that sort of an impulse.
Well, they're going to seek out stability. And you made a great point that a lot of people, their prejudice towards jobs and regular salaried employment is that it's more stable. And that's becoming difficult, especially in my opinion, at least my professional life. There's been a profound chilling effect across the entire white collar landscape about keeping people on long term period. Like, there's mass layoffs across the tech sector and also across the media sector are so common they don't fucking report them anymore, and that's the lived experience for a lot of people. And the problem is that you need something like that to get a mortgage, consistent income. That would be the only benefit of being a wagey. But for a lot of people, they're not going to have that. And we haven't even talked about AI. We haven't talked about how that revolution is going to put more and more people out of work, right? We don't even need to go down that road. But the idea is that entrepreneurship, if you actually look under the hood of most businesses, they're on the brink of failure at any given moment. The idea that you are safe if you've been there for 5 years. Chris, I moved to a new city for a job. That was my dream job at one of the largest agencies in Canada. And I was part of a union. That didn't fucking help me. I got laid off because of COVID. unions don't really help you when it comes down to it. Not all of them anyway, but this idea that you're safe doesn't exist, and a lot of people are learning that the hard way. So the idea, like you're saying, that will become more stable in the eyes of a lot of regular people very soon. um anyway, so I just wanted to add to that. I agree with what you're saying completely. And unfortunately, it will be incumbent upon those of us who have the ability to sort of spin up these organizations and these enterprises to employ or otherwise help out those who can just who only know how to have a job. I don't know what percentage of the population that is, but I bet it's a lot. Some people don't have the entrepreneurial drive, and for those of us who do, we have something like a duty to
Mm-hmm.
help them. And maybe that's where we start working on, like, oh, we're only going to employ men, like we're just going to
Mm-hmm.
be sexist, we're just going to be racist, we'll be whatever the fuck we want. But that's you're going to need to drag people along with you, because you need to actually like people. And this is something I say to people on our side of things, because a lot of people who get nihilistic and blackpilled and whatever you want to call it, they don't have a great affection for other people. They want society to end because they want it to suffer. They want people to suffer. They want people to die. Maybe they feel wronged. There's a litany of reasons. Leftists are largely guided by this, but so are people on the right too. And I think those who engage in these sorts of projects need to really like people. They really need to like even the dumb ones, even the ugly ones, even the ones who may agree with you. You need to have an affection for people who maybe wronged you in the past. Like, do you want everyone who thought you were crazy for COVID to die? That's a lot of people. That's a lot of good people too. Not every
Mm-hmm.
pro-vax person was like evil. You know what I mean? So like,
Mm-hmm.
what are you to do with these people? And it's going to be a hard thing. It's a lot of responsibility for individuals to shoulder. But what else is there? I actually don't know. I think that's just an ugly, because remember, like when we talk about male female relations, maybe this will bring together everything we've been talking about. A lot of younger people now, they're starting all this for the first time. Like, speaking for myself, speaking for many of our listeners, like they don't have the last three generations of their family didn't give them anything, didn't pass anything down, no property, no nothing. Maybe they were all shit libs, So if you're a traditionally minded person, a lot of people who are into Christianity are recent converts. Maybe their entire family going back 5 generations were atheists. They're starting that, and they're starting like, I want to make a legacy home. I want to build a house. I want to do the opposite of what my parents did for me. I want to give something for my kids. And you were never taught the tools on how to do that. So now, hey, you want to go homesteading? You got to learn a whole suite of new skills that in an ideal world would have been passed down to you from your father or his grandfather. You just have to learn a bunch of new shit. And it sucks. And it's not fair that you need to do that. It's not fair that, you come from a family of, single children and you want to have 5 kids with your wife. You don't know how to do that. That's new shit. That's fucking mind bending. And it sucks. But what else are you going to do? You know what I mean? It's got to
Mm-hmm.
start somewhere. And I think, that's the burden that a certain segment of people are going to have to do. And the way you do that is if you actually have an affection, if you love the people, you love your people, your community, your family. But that's what's going to get you through doing all this fucking back-breaking, mind-breaking labor ahead of us.
It's funny you talked about earlier about like the find the horoscope bitches, or the chicks that do have the crystals, that sort of thing. And what you'll find with a lot of those types is they'll talk about manifesting and having an attitude of abundance, and or an attitude of gratitude, and all the stuff is it's gotten very corny and very um, I don't know, it's just it's cringe, but at the same time it's also true that, like, if you actually have that attitude, if you actually approach the world as if it is a place of opportunity and abundance and potential, then you will actually develop a magnetic attraction to other people, and other people will have a magnetic attraction to you. I don't know what it is: vibes, energy, chemicals, pheromones, whatever it is, spiritual radar. This is the way that human beings seek each other out and organize together. And the people who see the world as something with the potential to be more than it currently is will attract people who want to be around them, who want to give them resources, who want to invest with them, who want their help, who want to help them. And the people who see the world as a shithole that's devolving, and they pick out all the bad stuff, and they believe the world is gradually becoming less and less and less. That it's a self-extinguishing worldview. It's a self-extinguishing perspective that frankly just gives off bad vibes. The
Yeah.
crystal chicks aren't gonna want to be around you if you're giving off the bad vibes.
Yeah, they're all in tune with energies and things like that.
Yeah, right.
You know what's funny, and maybe we can cap it with this. There's a book I always like to mention, and maybe people are sick of me bringing it up, but it relates to what you were just saying. It's called "Experiences in Groups" by Wilfred Bion, Bion. I would recommend people look at this book. It's a psychology book. Written by a guy who's in the mid 20th century, who I believe might have tutored under Freud. So a lot of people who don't like psychology, I understand it. We've done a great amount of coverage that's critical of psychology and psychiatry, especially. But what was interesting about this book was that Freud had this idea of psychoanalysis on a one-to-one basis. You got the therapist and you have the individual, because his view of humans was kind of secular humanist in that sense. Like, it's the individual and everything can be subdivided to the individual. Bion, his area of inquiry was group dynamics, because he said, people don't really engage with the world as individuals. They engage with it as members of groups. And groups form in different ways. Lots of different types of groups. There's family, there's community, but then there's also groups that kind of emerge organically in a situation. And he conducted a great many experiments that are outlined in this book. And he talked about two types of groups that he saw emerge, these two broad categories. One was called a basic assumption group, and one was called a work group. So the experiment he did was really kind of funny, where he'd get a bunch of people together in a kind of a semicircle, and they were going into that group with expectations that they would do something. And then he's there at the center and pretending he doesn't know why they're there. Right. He's like, I don't know what you were misled. I'm sorry. I don't know how to help you. And kind of seeing what happens, seeing what emerges, what relationships are brokered internally within the group, how they come to decisions, because a group always emerges. And he said, and I'll try and speed ahead because you can spend a lot of time on this book. I encourage people to read it. But he said that the work group was always different, because if they were given a mission, if they were given a trajectory or something to do or a project, they were willing to kind of put aside a lot of their ideological or personal differences to accomplish something. Whereas if you kind of just bring people together and let them fester and don't give them a direction or goal, really strange things start to happen. You start seeing very strange group dynamics emerge. They start electing leaders and they start glorifying relationships. There's a lot of drama. There's people who are exiled from the group. All these weird things happen when people come together and they believe they're together for a reason but don't have anything to do. But if they're given a goal, they can actually move in that direction. But a goal can be accomplished. And once it's accomplished, you need another goal, because then they start to fester. I mean, he breaks this down in the book. I won't go through all the subsets of a basic assumption group, but you'll see a lot of commonalities with it in our scene. You start kind of trying to elect these cults of personality very easily form in these environments. And he found an interesting thing was groups tended to elect the most mentally ill leader because they represented the most extreme version of whatever their belief was. So in these groups, you're almost destined to have the most sociopathic person become the leader of that group. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds on here. However, that is to say that when you have a group that has a goal, you can actually, and maybe the last time that happened was with Trump, because a lot of people that remember the Trump election has this one time where a lot of people got along for a few minutes because they had a goal of getting this motherfucker elected. But then eventually he does. And then what happens? Then we just kind of start to fester, and there's weird leaders that emerge. And then there's we start creating like an internal mythology that kind of devours us and itself, So I feel like that's what we're experiencing right now. And I think the antidote to that, and the cure for the cults of personality, and the cure for all these sociopathic motherfuckers that have achieved leadership positions in this space, is to have something like a project that not doesn't necessarily need a leader, you know. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent there. What do you think about that?
That was good. That was. I think that's a good spot to wrap it. Meta Prime in the chat says your mindset is an energy frequency, and other people on that frequency will come together. The "we are going to make it" crowd is finding each other. Next time we talk, we should get extra weird with it.
Oh, I can do
We should
that.
get real deep into the stuff like this stuff with energy and vibes and frequencies and weird math shit and like group dynamics, the way individuals or not individuals, but the way that groups of people at varying sizes have different personalities, like the soul of a group, the spirit of a room. And then what was the other thing I was thinking of? It was along those same lines. Anyway, just like the weird spooky stuff that exists within human psychology and collective psychology, and the way that reflects on us and the way we reflect on that. We should get funky with it next time.
Absolutely. I can go deep with all this nonsense. I can alienate everyone.
Yes, let's do it. All right, Dimes. I appreciate you, man. Thank you for your flexibility at the beginning here and getting this all going. I think
Oh,
this
no
was great.
problem.
We've had a
I
good
had
talk,
a
and
phenomenal time. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me on.
yeah, absolutely, man. You are welcome back anytime. Let the good people know where they can find you.
Oh yeah, check out bloodsatellite.ca. That's where you can find full episodes of the show, all of the links, access to our paywall show called Real Secret Coffee Hours, where we kind of go over contentious issues and covered in Substacks in our scene. And I'm on Twitter X at Legally Ironic.
What's the story behind that name?
Oh well, at Legally Ironic. Well, I've been banned from Twitter like 7 times. So I've been on there for quite some time, and I just kept getting banned, and that was the one that Blood Satellite banned. So anything Dimes, every iteration of Dimes was banned. So that was just one that stuck, and I thought it was just kind of a funny name, and so that's me. Kind of like the name Dimes. Didn't intend on that being my main moniker. Like all nicknames, it found me, and now I'm cursed to it.
Well, great. I love it. Thank you guys for showing up in the chat today. Thank you for the fantastic conversation. I think we've got one of the best chats in the internet. We've got some good people in here today. Thank you for showing up, Meta Prime and the Prudentialist, and then all of our regulars. And I did see that King Salmonfish is now a member of the King Pilled, thanks to random username. So welcome on board, buddy. Glad to have you. And you can follow me on Twitter at Real King Pilled. You can join the King Pilled Discord. Go to kingpilled.com. It's a great place. We've got lots of good conversations happening in there, and we are actually we have a culture there that is focused on doing things, not just talking, not just theory selling, but actually doing things, working on projects either together or individually, and seeing in what ways we can support each other through that. So I highly recommend you join. We'd love to have you there. Kingpilled.com and sign up there. Come join the Discord, and I think that's it. I think this is the latest I've ever been on a show. It's 10 after 11. I've still got to get some work done, so I'm going to go do that now. Thank you guys. Thank you, Dimes, and we will see you guys next time.